If you're learning German, you have definitely hit the verb wall. You know, where you learn a rule and then almost immediately you find a ton of verbs that just don't follow it. It can feel like you're just memorizing this endless random list of exceptions. But what if I told you they're not exceptions at all? What if it's all just a big puzzle and today we're going to put the pieces together?
So this is the big question, right? It's the one that drives so many of us crazy. You think you're finally getting the hang of it, and then bam, a verb comes along and just throws a wrench in everything. And look, that feeling is super common, but I promise you, there is a method to the madness.
So, let's just look at a classic example of this. On the left, you've got a perfectly well-behaved verb, sagen, to say. For the do form, you add est. You get du sagst. Easy, predictable. But then, look at the right. You've got sprechen, to speak. Now you'd think it would be du sprichst, but nope, it's du sprichst. Where on earth did that E come from? This is exactly the kind of broken rule we're going to clear up today.
All right, let's dive right into this. We're going to see that these verbs aren't really rule breakers. They're just playing a different game with their own set of rules and, believe it or not, their own logic.
This right here, this is the key. It's a total mindset shift. We have to stop thinking of these verbs as random, annoying exceptions that we have to cram into our brains. Instead, let's start seeing them as members of different clubs, and each club has its own special rulebook, you see? It's not chaos, it's just a few different systems all working at the same time.
So let's start with the easiest system. Honestly, these verbs aren't really that irregular. They're just making these little, polite adjustments to make the words easier to say. They're actually helping you sound smoother.
And the key to understanding this is to think about the why. Take the verb arbeiten, to work. The stem is arbeit. Now, if you just slapped the st on the end, you'd get arbeitest. Go ahead, try to say that a few times. It's just clumsy, isn't it? That st sound kind of gets stuck in your mouth.
So German does this really smart, sensible thing. It just slips in a little connecting vowel, an E, to break up those clunky consonants. So arbeitest becomes du arbeitest. See? It just flows so much better. This isn't some random exception. It's a logical fix to make pronunciation possible.
Okay, here's the second type of polite adjustment. Look at the verb heißen, to be called. The stem, heiß, already ends with that sharp S sound. So if you added the normal est ending, you'd get heißt, which sounds exactly the same as heißt. That extra S does absolutely nothing. It's totally redundant. And again, German is just being super efficient here. It's basically saying, hey, why are we adding a letter that makes zero difference? So for any verb stem that already ends in an S sound, the do form just adds a T. That's it. Du heißt. It's clean, it's logical, and it's all about not wasting letters. Okay, you ready? Now we get to the big one. These are the verbs you probably think of when you hear irregular. I call them the shapeshifters, the ones that seem to just change their form right in the middle. But even these guys follow one very strict, very important pattern.
This is it. This is the golden rule. If you remember one thing from this whole explainer, make it this. For these strong verbs, no matter what weird vowel change happens, it only, and I mean only, affects the do and the zs forms. That's the secret. The other forms, totally normal.
And here's the proof, right in action. Let's look at fahren, to drive. Ich fahre, wir fahren, fahrt. All look perfectly regular, right? But check out what happens in those two special slots. For do and zss, that A in the middle suddenly changes to an E. Du fährst, fährt. The pattern is so clear once you see it, it's totally contained. And even these vowel changes fall into predictable groups. You'll see that A to A switch a lot, like we just saw. Another really common one is E changing to E. And hey, that's our old friend sprechen becoming sprichst. And sometimes that E will stretch out into a long E sound, like in sehen, to see, which becomes siehst. So you're not guessing randomly. You're looking for one of these common patterns.
So here it is, your new mental checklist. Anytime you run into one of these strong verbs, you just ask yourself two questions. 1.
Is the subject du or erst sehe, siehst? 2. If the answer is yes, and only if it's yes, then you make that vowel change. If the subject is anything else, you just conjugate it like a normal verb. Simple as that.
Okay, time for our last category, and this one is actually pretty fun. I like to call these the boomerang verbs, because you literally take a piece off the front, throw it, and it lands all the way at the end of the sentence.
So, the official name is Separable Verbs, or trennbare Verben, and they're made of two parts, a core verb you probably already know, and a little prefix stuck on the front, like ein, or auf, or mit. The number one rule to remember is that in a basic sentence, these two parts do not stay together.
And the rule for where it goes is just beautifully simple. The main part of the verb, the core, gets conjugated and sits right in its normal spot, position 2. But that little prefix, it gets kicked all the way to the very, very end of the clause.
Okay, let's try one. The verb is einladen, which means to invite. How would you put that into this sentence to say, I invite Kedar? Where do the two pieces go?
And here's how it works. The core verb, lade, is conjugated for ich and goes right into that second position. Then the rest of the sentence happens. And then, waiting for us right at the very end is our little boomerang prefix, ein. Ich lade Kedar ein. You see how it creates this frame around the sentence? That's a super classic feature of German grammar. So is there ever a time when the boomerang doesn't get thrown? Yes, but only in one very specific case. Look at the left. Ich wache auf. I wake up. The verb splits, just like we learned. But now look at the right. When we add a modal verb, one of those helper verbs, like muss for must or kann for can, the modal verb takes over second place and our boomerang verb gets glued back together at the end. Ich muss aufwachen. That powerful modal verb keeps the two pieces together.
So there you have it. We've just unpacked 3 totally different systems that are hiding behind those so-called irregular verbs. We've got the polite little pronunciation tweaks, the shape-shifting vowel changes, and the splitting boomerang verbs. So let's put these new tools in our toolkit and see what we can do with them.
What this really means is that a lot of common mistakes suddenly make sense. You now know why it's du sprichst. It's a strong verb. It's just following its pattern. You know why du arbeitest needs that little e. It's for pronunciation. And you know the rules for those boomerang prefixes, when to send them to the end, and the one key time when you don't. These aren't just random mistakes anymore. They're signs of a system that you actually understand now. And this really is what I want you to take away today. The real key to mastering German verbs isn't having a gigantic memory. It's about having a good eye for patterns. So stop trying to memorize a massive list of broken rules and start looking for the different systems that are at play. You know, this whole idea of finding patterns applies to so much more than just verbs. The entire German language is built on these kinds of logical, interconnected systems. So now that you know how to look for them with verbs, what other hidden rules do you think are out there, just waiting for you to discover them? Thanks so much for watching.